Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Layo Olarinde. Counting of votes is underway in Chad for a presidential election intended to mark the end of 3 years of military rule. Dozens of security forces have been deployed in the capital in N'Djamena amid rising tensions on Monday, even as polls closed in the first presidential election in Africa's Sahel region since a wave of coups. Now, Monday's election pitted President Mohamed Idris Deby against his Prime Minister's successor, Masra, previously a political opponent who fled into exile in 2022 but was allowed back a year later. Also in the running is former Prime Minister Albert Padek and 7 other candidates, which includes a woman. Now, some 8.5 million people were registered to vote on Monday. Provincial results are expected by the 21st of May and final results by the 5th of June. And if no candidate wins more than 50% of the votes, a runoff will be held on June 22nd. Well, joining us now is Chukwuemeka Eze, the Executive Director of West Africa Network for Peace Building, WANEP. Oh, thank you so much for your time on Network Africa.
My pleasure.
Even as we wait for the results, in the Chad elections, what are your thoughts on the polls, which happen to be the first in 3 decades and is intended to end the military rule in the country?
I think for me is to appreciate it as a modeling through option, like the best alternative to no other alternative. I think that Chad's election offers the voter now a choice, even if it has been alluded to being masterminded, both by the geopolitics currently going on across the globe and also the preferences of Mr. Deby, who seized power 3 years ago after his father died. But I think that the most important thing is that we can see a transition, no matter how bad it is, and this will get both the parliament and probably the judiciary to work. And whether it is a transition from just wearing one kind of clothes to the other, or whether it is indeed a transition from consolidated autocracy to consolidation of democracy, I think that the most important thing is that there is going to be a transition in the next 1 month in Chad. So we should appreciate that for whatever it is worth, even amidst all the obvious challenges surrounded with the transition process.
Well, some experts are saying that, the vote is just to formalize the military's hold on power, being that General Mohamed Idris Deby is seen as the front runner. Do you agree with this?
Well, I think that a couple of people actually advised the opposition candidates to come together and form a formidable force. There are also allegations that some of the candidates may have actually been sponsored by the current president to give him, to favor him in countering the votes of other stronger opposition. In my opinion, at the end of the day, it is about the transparency of the electoral process that enables the voters and the Chadian citizens to make their wish. If they wish that it is the current president that should remove his khaki and now put on a civilian dress, so be it. I think that, of course, we understand the challenges that democracy is facing in Africa as a whole. And then for Chad, where the institutions of the state has been under an autocratic government, what do we expect? But I think that at the end of the day, at least something is being seen to be happening. And this will have, in my opinion, ripple effects, especially on the rest of the Sahel states, namely in West Africa, namely Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and to a large extent, Guinea. And probably that begins to put pressure on the rest of the junta on the continent that there is a way out. Probably, I would think that this has been a product of some of the key pressure that is being put on Deby to vacate and end the military regime. Don't forget that the current chairperson of African Union, that should be the moral persona for democracy, is actually a Chadian. So how could he be asking people to respect the Africa governance architecture and the democracy and good governance protocols by African Union, and yet his own country is under a military regime? So I'm sure that some of this pressure may have contributed, of course, to the pressure that allowed Deby to yield, and this may have been a compromised option.
And for the countries which you have, some of which you have mentioned that are still under military rule, what are the lessons, they can learn from Chad?
I think it's just to understand that there is a way out of it, and that this is not the first time this is happening. I'm sure that you remember that in Togo, for example, when the former president Yedima died, his son Gnassingbe actually also took over in a military fashion, and he took the intervention of our President Olusegun Obasanjo, to intervene, and in what people actually say that Olusegun Obasanjo just asked him to remove his clothes and contest, and that they will put pressure and make sure that he win. Since then, he has been the president. For whatever it is worth, it is still under a democratic regime. Remember, what this also signifies is that a lot of pressure is going to be put on the rest of these Sahelian states to see other options through which they can ascend to power. And for me, whether that is a compromise option or not, it can be described as a modeling through option and will enable at least for something to happen. It's better that we have the worst type of transition than that we continue to have military boys that are supposed to be in barracks now saddled with the responsibility of governance in 21st century in Africa. I think for me, that would be a shame.
All right, then. Thank you so much. Chukwemeka is the Executive Director of the West African Network for Peace Building, WANEP. Thank you for your thoughts.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Now, Togolese President Gnassingbe has signed a controversial new constitution that eliminates presidential elections in the country. This is a move opponents say will allow him to extend his family's 6-decade-long rule. Under the new legislation, Parliament will have the power to choose the president, and that's doing away with direct elections. The Election Commission on Saturday announced that President Gnassingbe's ruling party had won a majority of seats in the West African nation's parliament. Provisional results also showed that the ruling Union for the Republic, UNIR party, won 108 out of 113 seats in Parliament and 137 out of 179 positions in the Senate. Now, the new constitution also increases presidential terms from 5 to 6 years and introduces a single-term limit. However, the almost 20 years that Gnassingbe has already served in office would not count toward that tally. And over in Kenya, President William Ruto has promised emergency financial assistance to every household that's been affected and displaced by the floods in Nairobi. He was speaking during a visit of the affected areas in the capital's dense informal settlements. Mr. Ruto has pledged to give each family 10,000 shillings, vowing to rebuild all schools and buildings destroyed by the floods. Now, schools were supposed to resume on Monday this week, but that has now been postponed until further notice, even as heavy rains and floods that have killed more than 200 people continue. The president also announced the construction of 20,000 houses expected to help people living in informal settlements. This construction is under his affordable housing project that he says will go on to end such flooding-related displacements in the future. Now, Kenya and other parts of East Africa have been overwhelmed by flooding, with more than 150,000 people displaced, living in camps across the country. Well, the UN Refugee Agency has also been trying to help those affected by the intense weather in Burundi, Tanzania and Kenya. Heavy rains and flash floods continue to hit parts of East Africa, impacting thousands of people, including refugees in the region. Our next report highlights the challenges many of the victims face.
In Burundi, around 32,000 refugees are living in areas hit by floods. 500 of them require urgent assistance. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, met with some of the refugees in the capital, Bujumbura, to assess the situation. Some families, including elderly, have had to relocate multiple times. Njembo is a Congolese refugee who moved to Burundi in 2020.
When I moved here in 2020, there was no water. Vehicles could drive up to my house. But when the water started rising, it filled the houses. As the years went by, the water levels kept increasing every season. This year, the water levels are very high. They are catastrophic. I don't know what to do. I don't have the means to rent another house to stay in.
Access to food and other necessities is becoming increasingly difficult as people have to pay high transport fees to use canoes to reach markets and other amenities. The UNHCR says it is particularly concerned about people who had already been forced to flee, losing their homes again, showing how forcibly displaced people continue to be on the front lines of the climate crisis.
The flooding forced me to move out. The water has been rising here. We're a family of 10, and there are children as well who are in school. I'm also a student. We often get late for class. When we moved here, we never imagined the waters could ever reach this level, but it kept rising, so we decided to move out.
In Kenya, nearly 20,000 people at the Dadaab refugee camps have been displaced. Many of them arrived in recent times after fleeing severe drought in neighboring Somalia. Nearly 2,600 people are sheltering in 7 schools that have been extensively damaged. Several latrines have also collapsed, putting refugees at risk of deadly waterborne diseases.
When the floods came into the house, I woke up my children. I tried to rescue them before the house collapsed. We ran towards the school. We were inside the school and stayed there for several nights. The water has receded, but we have nowhere to return to. No shelter, no latrines, no home.
Other countries where displaced people are among the hardest hit include Somalia, with over 46,000 internally displaced people in 5 locations south of the country, forced to relocate due to flash floods. In Tanzania, the Nyarugusu and Duta camps have been impacted. Roads within the 2 camps have been damaged, disrupting assistance and service. The UNHCR says it is working to deliver crucial aid and protection services to the affected people in Kenya and Burundi. For those in Tanzania, the agency is working with local partners to rehabilitate refugee shelters.
The United Nations World Food Programme is warning that time is running out to prevent starvation in Darfur as intensifying clashes in North Darfur's capital, El Fasher, are hindering efforts to deliver food assistance into the region. WFP spokesperson in Sudan, Lenny Kinsley, says this latest escalation of violence around El Fasher has halted aid convoys coming from Chad's border crossing, which was recently opened as a humanitarian corridor. She adds that restrictions from authorities in Port Sudan are also preventing WFP from transporting assistance via Adre, which is the only other viable route.
Around Al Fasher. So today, the United Nations World Food Programme is warning that time is running out to prevent starvation in Darfur, as intensifying clashes in North Darfur's capital, Al Fasher, are hindering our efforts to deliver vital food assistance into the region. This latest escalation of violence around Al Fasher has halted aid convoys coming from Chad's Tina border crossing, which has recently been opened as a humanitarian corridor that passes through North Darfur's capital. Meanwhile, restrictions from authorities in Port Sudan are preventing WFP from transporting assistance via Adre, the only other viable cross-border corridor from Chad. The route can serve West Darfur and other locations in Central, South, and East Darfur. These access constraints are jeopardizing our plans to provide vital assistance to over 700,000 people ahead of the rainy season, when many roads across Darfur become impassable. WFP currently has 8,000 tons of food supplies ready to move in Chad, ready to transport, but isn't able to do so because of these constraints.
We're in South Africa now, where at least 5 people have died and about 50 others remain trapped following the collapse of a building in the Western Cape province. Rescue teams say they had contacted about 11 survivors buried under the rubble after they worked overnight at the site in the coastal city of George. Now, the 5-story building, which was under construction, collapsed on Monday afternoon. 26 of the 75 construction workers on site at the time of the collapse had been pulled from the rubble by Tuesday morning. 5 were declared dead and the remainder transported to hospital. Now, of the 49 still unaccounted for, rescuers say they have contacted 11 people. Let's get more on this from our correspondent in South Africa. Innocent Samosa joins us now on the program. Hello, Innocent. What updates can you tell us about the building collapse at this time? Have more people been rescued?
Well, a very good evening to you, colleague, and our viewers around the world. Indeed, a tragic incident taking place in the Western Cape in George. But that number now, we are told by authorities that that number is now 6 people are confirmed dead, and 49 are still trapped under the rubble. But we also know again that this particular site was for construction, but also it took them time to really find out who is the owner of that construction site. But we understand again that at least 12 people, we do know that it was 11 during the afternoon, but 12 people are in contact with the rescue operation team. But also the numbers keep changing because it's still new. The rescue operation team is trying, to rescue these people. At the same time, they have to, speak to the media and update the public. Like,
Yeah, in a sense. And we know, this building is under construction, was under construction. Do we know what, caused the building to go down?
well, at this point in time, it's not clear what really led to the collapse of this building. But we do know that investigations have started, as I've indicated, that now the authorities know the owners of that construction site. But I guess what they are looking at is an engineering fault, which of course is making it difficult for the rescue operation team because now they're speaking about issues around, that the concrete is very hard and the steel to really rescue the people. So it's really a challenging situation. But for now, Layo, we do know that investigations are underway into the cause of this particular collapse of this building, Layo.
All right, and have we heard from the government on this, and how are South Africans, reacting to this tragic incident?
Well, for now, we've not heard from the South African. There's no official statement from the government. But what we heard, it's the local government that is led by the mayor, Leon van Wyk, who told the public that he's requesting for people to really come and help, with food parcels, with energy drinks, with water for the team on the ground, because it's really a tedious process to really try to, evacuate those people there. So he's calling for the public to really try to come on board and really, help the people by giving back. We know that an NGO group that's called Gift of the Givers, they're already on the ground to really try to help, the staff there that is trying to really repatriate the people. But we heard also from the mayor who briefed the media this afternoon, Layo. He said that about 75 people were in the building, were working on the building, and about 21 people survived, and also that number from 5, now it's 6 people who are confirmed dead, Layo.
Such a tragic and unfortunate incident, and we do hope those that, are still under the rubble are pulled out alive and safe. Thank you so much, Innocent Samosa, our correspondent in South Africa.
Thank you so much, colleague.
A Malawian court has dropped corruption charges against Vice President Saulos Chilima after the state prosecutor filed a notice for the case to be discontinued. Now, no reasons have been given for the decision, but the latest move has provoked questions over the government's handling of prosecutions for alleged corruption in the country. Dr. Saulos Chilima was arrested in November 2022 on allegations that he accepted money in exchange for awarding government contracts, but he denies these charges. Now, the vice president's arrest followed accusations that he received money to influence the awarding of contracts to 2 companies linked to British businessman Zunet Satter, who is also denying any wrongdoing. Well, the vice president has made several court appearances since his arrest, although the actual trial never started. The annual Africa Dialogue Series of the United Nations, ADS 2024, is underway, with the theme of the 2024 edition being Education Through Science, Technology and Innovation Toward the Africa We Want. ADS 2024 aims to mobilize actions and inspire solutions, leveraging the power of science, technology and innovation to boost access to quality education on the continent. Christina Duarte, the UN Special Advisor on Africa, and Ambassador Fatima Mohammed, the observer for the African Union to the United Nations, briefed on the annual flagship event.
This basically is a clarion call to action. It is a rallying cry for African member states to prioritize education as the cornerstone for progress and development. This initiative also underscores the importance of building transformed, resilient education systems that not only increase access, but also inclusive quality and relevance in learning.
STEM education for the fourth industrial revolution. So, as everybody knows, the main challenge is to create decent jobs in Africa. 95% of the young population in Africa, I'd like to repeat this number, 95% of the young population in Africa has no access to decent jobs, which means that sometimes to have a job in Africa does not work as a tool to get out of poverty. Why innovative financing? To transform education in Africa. As my dear sister mentioned, we have more than 100 million children outside school. We can assure you that the old financing model, business as usual, will not address this issue. 100 million people outside school with no fiscal space. So education calls for innovative financing, leveraging ICT to deal with this issue. Instability has been increasing. Conflict has been increasing. And we need, from a policy making and from a UN system standpoint, we need to discuss how to address instability and conflict without putting on hold education, which means without putting on hold or without closing schools.
Now, over $55 million is being invested in building and upgrading schools in Liberia, a courtesy of the European Union. Officials say they will become the state-of-the-art technical, vocational education and training schools. Students will be able to choose from a range of specialisms including agriculture, welding, mechanics, carpentry and computing. 9 existing schools in Liberia are being kitted out with a further 8 being built from scratch, with completion expected 5 years from now. The earmarked sites are located in the capital Monrovia and across the country. Liberia's Education Minister, Jaso Jala, says these facilities, which specifically cater to young people pursuing vocational rather than academic studies, are restoring hope in their future and that no one is left behind. And that's where we end the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.